With 21 Academy Award nominations and 3 Oscar wins, Meryl didn't just conquer Hollywood, she redefined it, rebuilt it in her own image, and set a standard no one has ever reached since. For decades, she wasn't just an actress, she was a mirror, reflecting back to us our deepest fears, our regrets, and our fragile hopes. Yet behind Sophie's haunted stare, behind Miranda Priestley's icy perfection, behind Margaret Thatcher's unyielding strength, was a woman quietly unraveling. And now at 76, something feels undeniably different. The silence surrounding her has grown heavier, and those closest to her have stopped speaking. So the question lingers. What really happened to Meryl Streep at 76? Before we answer, we must go back. Back to the very beginning. To a young girl in thick glasses, hiding brilliance behind silence, standing unnoticed in the crowd. That was where the legend began. Born in 1949 in Summit, New Jersey, Meryl's childhood was shaped by contradictions. Her father, a strict pharmaceutical executive, embodied discipline and order. Her mother, a bohemian artist, radiated freedom and creativity. These opposing forces didn't balance each other out. They tore at her from both sides. She was expected to be perfect yet limitless, grounded yet free. And in that tug of war, a little girl lost a piece of herself. At school, Meryl wasn't bullied, but she wasn't seen either. In a world that celebrated the bold and the beautiful, she faded into the background. "I never thought I was beautiful," she once confessed. "I just didn't think I belonged." Even when her classmates crowned her prom queen, she looked in the mirror and couldn't recognize the girl they saw. To her, it was a cruel irony. Adored on the outside, but quietly breaking on the inside. That invisible ache, the need to be seen and truly understood, became the quiet ember that would one day fuel her artistry. Acting wasn't about ambition for young Meryl, it was survival. By the time she was 12, Meryl had already discovered a gift few could ignore: her voice. Under the tutelage of the legendary vocal coach Estelle Liebling, she began formal opera lessons. Her voice soared, carrying both discipline and elegance. But her heart felt curiously absent. Years later, she would admit, "I was singing something I didn't feel." That moment was shattering. For the first time, she realized what it meant to lie on stage, and she made a vow that would define her career, never to perform anything she could not bleed into. Even in high school, where she joined the cheerleading squad and basked in the admiration of peers, Meryl carried her loneliness like an invisible scar. She didn't crave popularity. She studied it, observed it. That sharp eye for human behavior, the ability to vanish into silence and see people for who they truly were, became her secret weapon. "When you don't feel like you're enough," she once reflected, "you learn to become anything." And that was how acting found her, not through ambition, but through necessity. Each early role wasn't just a character, it was a refuge, a chance to be loved without exposing herself, to be heard without shouting, to exist without apology. Long before Hollywood praised her as a chameleon, Meryl Streep was simply a young woman aching to be seen. That ache followed her to Yale School of Drama in 1971, where she pursued what many considered the pinnacle of artistic education. Yet for her, Yale wasn't a place of glory. It was a crucible, relentless and unforgiving. To afford tuition, she threw herself into an exhausting schedule. More than a dozen plays each year, juggling rehearsals, coursework, and side jobs. The pressure was unrelenting, and the toll was brutal. By 1973, at only 24, she developed a bleeding stomach ulcer. "I felt like I was unraveling from the inside," she later confessed. There were nights when she cried backstage until dawn. Mornings when she woke only with dread. Her peers sometimes questioned if she truly belonged, and privately, so did she. She even considered law school applications, whispering to a friend, "If this is the cost of art, I'm not sure I can pay it." But there was something deeper that held her in place. Acting wasn't just about career for Meryl, it was about survival. Every role became a lifeline, a place to pour her chaos and find a fleeting stillness. By the time she graduated in 1975 at the age of 26, she was physically drained yet emotionally ignited. She moved to New York City, renting a modest apartment, accepting whatever off-Broadway roles she could find. The jobs weren't glamorous. The audiences were small. The pay was meager. But each performance carved her into something unbreakable. In 1976, she played Helena in A Midsummer Night's Dream, in a production that barely filled its seats. Yet a critic took notice and wrote, "She burns quietly, but she burns through you." It was just a flicker, but it was enough. Still, doubts haunted her. "I didn't have the kind of beauty they were looking for," she recalled. "I thought I'd never get past the casting couch, let alone into a real career." Every rejection felt like a personal wound. Every silence after an audition was a death sentence. And yet, she persisted. Brick by brick, wound by wound, she built her foundation. Not on glamour, but on defiance. And then in 1977 came her breakthrough, a brief role in Julia. Just a few minutes of screen time. But it was enough for producers to lean in and whisper, "Who is she?" The world had begun to take notice. In 1977, Meryl Streep appeared briefly in Julia. It was only a whisper of a role, just minutes on screen. But in that short span, she carried a force Hollywood could not ignore. A year later, in The Deer Hunter, 1978, her performance radiated with heartbreaking tenderness. But behind the camera, her world was collapsing. During filming, Meryl was living a love story that would shape her forever. She had met actor John Cazale, known for his haunting role as Fredo Corleone in The Godfather. John was older, private, and fiercely brilliant. To Meryl, he wasn't just a partner, he was home. "He saw through me," she later said. Their love wasn't about glitz or headlines. It was late-night rehearsals, quiet conversations, whispered dreams. But their time together was cruelly short. In 1977, John was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer, already spread to his bones. He was only 42. Meryl, just 27, was standing on the cusp of fame, with the world beginning to notice her brilliance. She had every reason to turn away, but she didn't. Instead, she moved in with him. She stayed by his side through every treatment, every sleepless night, every breath that grew weaker than the last. She even negotiated with producers to keep him in The Deer Hunter despite his illness, pushing to have his scenes filmed first. Co-star Robert De Niro once revealed, "Meryl gave everything to John. She was his life support, literally. When John grew too weak to stand, she carried him. When silence consumed him, she stayed with him in that silence. She moved into the hospital where he was being treated, sleeping in chairs, barely eating, holding his hand until the very end. On March 12, 1978, John Cazale took his last breath, and Meryl was there, holding him. The grief was blinding, yet just 6 months later, she married sculptor Don Gummer, a longtime friend who had helped her through the darkest days. To some it seemed sudden, even strange. But for Meryl, it wasn't about forgetting John. It was about surviving the unbearable. "That pain never left me," she once whispered. "It just learned to stay quiet." Still, her heartbreak poured into her work. In The Deer Hunter, she earned her first Oscar nomination. In Kramer vs. Kramer, 1979, she transformed a supporting role into something unforgettable. Playing Joanna, a mother torn between love and guilt, she was on screen for less than 20 minutes. But in those moments, she bared her soul. Every courtroom tear, every silent pause, every trembling glance. It wasn't acting, it was unraveling. She won her first Oscar for that role. But more than that, she won the hearts of millions. Audiences felt something they couldn't put into words: grief made real, pain dignified, love torn apart. Hollywood had found its new icon, but for Meryl, the price of becoming a legend was always written in heartbreak. The early 1980s were a storm of brilliance and torment for Meryl Streep. Hollywood had begun to understand that she was not like anyone else. She didn't play characters, she became them. Yet each role that elevated her status also took something from her, leaving scars invisible to the audience, but deeply etched into her soul. In 1982, she delivered what many still call one of the greatest performances ever captured on film: Sophie's Choice. The story of a Holocaust survivor forced to make an unthinkable decision between her two children shattered audiences. But it nearly shattered Meryl as well. She learned Polish and German, lost weight, and immersed herself so deeply into Sophie's tortured world that the trauma seeped into her body. The infamous scene, Sophie's devastating choice, left even the film crew in tears. But for Meryl, the damage ran deeper. "It broke me," she admitted years later. For months after filming ended, echoes of that scream lived inside her, a wound that never fully healed. This was no longer performance. It was emotional sacrifice. Then came Silkwood, 1983, where she portrayed Karen Silkwood, a nuclear plant whistleblower who mysteriously died. Preparing for the role, Meryl consumed herself with paranoia, with fear, with the crushing sense of impending doom. Friends recalled how she grew withdrawn, distant, and consumed. For a woman still grieving the loss of John Cazale, this role became a vessel for sorrow that hadn't yet found its place. And it showed. Every glance, every tremor in her voice was a raw echo of truth. 2 years later, in Out of Africa, 1985, she embodied Karen Blixen, a woman torn between grandeur and heartbreak. Audiences saw elegance, romance, tragedy, but what they didn't know was that Meryl was pouring her own grief into the performance, reliving the shadow of losing John Cazale. Her words later betrayed her truth. Love never dies. It just waits quietly in the shadows. Even in roles that seemed light on the surface, the pain persisted. In The Devil Wears Prada, 2006, she gave us Miranda Priestly, commanding, cold, untouchable, but beneath that steel facade was loneliness, a reflection of her own quiet suffering. Anne Hathaway revealed years later, Meryl was terrifying, but you could feel the sorrow underneath. Meryl even isolated herself from the cast during filming to preserve that distance, embodying power wrapped in pain. And in The Iron Lady, 2011, she transformed into Margaret Thatcher. Not just the Iron Lady of politics, but a woman unraveling into dementia and irrelevance. Meryl confessed, "That role scared me. It felt like a mirror." For decades, she poured her grief, her missed chances, her invisible scars into her work, and in return, the world applauded. But behind the golden statues and thunderous ovations was a woman sacrificing pieces of her own spirit. Greatness for Meryl Streep always carried a hidden cost: her peace of mind. 6 months after John Cazale's death, Meryl Streep made a decision that shocked many. She married Don Gummer, a sculptor and longtime friend. To some, it seemed too fast, too sudden, as though she was trying to erase the pain of losing John. But those who understood her best knew the truth. Don wasn't a replacement. He was a refuge, a safe harbor for a woman who had nearly drowned in grief. With Don, Meryl built something she had been starved of her entire life: stability. Together, they created a home, not out of Hollywood glitz, but out of quiet rhythms and family warmth. Over the decades, they raised 4 children: Henry, Mamie, Grace, and Louisa. Each followed an artistic path. Henry into music, her daughters into acting. But not because Meryl pushed them. Art had already soaked into their blood. While the world saw her clutching Oscars, dazzling on red carpets, and transforming into some of the most iconic characters in film history. At home, she was simply Mom. She packed lunches, read bedtime stories, listened to fears, and wiped away tears. Her children often described her not as a star, but as a presence. Steady, understanding, fiercely protective. For more than 4 decades, Meryl and Don's marriage seemed unshakable. No scandals, no tabloid headlines, no messy public unravelings. Just silence, privacy, and a love story protected from the noise of Hollywood. But behind the carefully guarded walls, cracks were forming. In 2023, the world finally learned what Meryl had kept private for 6 long years. She and Don Gummer had quietly separated back in 2017. There had been no public statements, no interviews, no court battles, just distance. Silent, dignified distance. When asked, her representatives simply said, "They will always care for each other." And perhaps that was true, but care doesn't always mean closeness. Love doesn't always mean forever. It is heartbreaking to imagine. The woman who once held John Cazale's hand until his final breath, who poured every ounce of her being into her family, who shielded her children from the spotlight, now walking quietly through the collapse of a marriage that the world believed was unbreakable. Even then, Meryl never lashed out, never explained. She continued to wear her wedding band in public, spoke of Don with kindness, never bitterness, because that is who she is. A woman who endures in silence, who holds her pain privately, and who continues to walk with grace even when the ground beneath her shifts. Some call it strength, others call it tragedy. For Meryl Streep, it was simply life. At the height of her career, with Oscars in her hands and her name spoken in reverence across the globe, Meryl Streep should have felt untouchable. But even legends bleed. Only they bleed in silence. Hollywood adored her on the surface, yet behind closed doors, whispers followed her like shadows. Jealousy, criticism, and dismissive remarks came not from strangers, but from peers. Those who should have understood her most. The great Katharine Hepburn, a titan of old Hollywood, once dismissed her with a single icy remark, "She's too cerebral, too technical." For Meryl, still carving her place, those words stung deeply. Actress Susan Sarandon once quipped, half joking but with an undeniable edge, "It's always Meryl. Always Meryl." And when Sharon Stone, herself celebrated for her beauty and boldness, declared that Meryl was not gorgeous, it wasn't just a jab at her looks. It was a reminder of the brutal standards still imposed on women, no matter their achievements. These weren't anonymous critics. These were her peers. And yet Meryl never responded. No clapbacks, no public feuds, just silence. Because she knew dignity speaks louder than defense. Then came the Karl Lagerfeld incident. The Chanel designer accused her of refusing to wear one of his gowns at the Oscars over money. The press devoured the story. Rumors swirled, headlines multiplied, and for a moment, even Meryl, the most celebrated actress of her time, became vulnerable to lies. She offered a simple clarification, nothing more. But the damage was done. In a rare moment of honesty, she admitted, "Acting is not about being pretty. It's about being real. But sometimes even that's not enough." Behind the diamonds, the gowns, and the endless applause was a woman often walking alone backstage, a woman who endured sideways glances, whispered judgments, and a soft erosion of trust from colleagues she once admired. She carried it all without protest. Because what was the alternative? To fight? To cry? To scream? That wasn't her way. The truth is, even icons get bruised. They just don't always let the world see the scars. Perhaps that is the part no one fully understands, how lonely greatness can be, how heavy it feels to be revered by millions, yet questioned by those standing beside you, how exhausting it is to carry a legacy when all you truly want is to be seen, not as a symbol, not as a standard, but simply as a human being. And so, for decades, Meryl endured. She kept working, she kept mothering, she kept giving, she just smiled, nodded, and kept going. Because that's what legends do. Not because they are invincible, but because they choose to survive with grace. At 76, Meryl Streep is not simply a retired icon. She is a living testament to how greatness ages, with grace, with intention, and with quiet sorrow. Unlike many of her peers, her fortune was never about glittering excess. It whispers instead in the soft acres of her 90-acre estate in Salisbury, Connecticut. Purchased in 1985. Hidden behind stone walls and velvet woods, it is her refuge, a sanctuary where fame cannot intrude. Here she walks in solitude, sometimes with grandchildren trailing behind her, sometimes alone, accompanied only by memory. She once owned a glass-wrapped penthouse in Tribeca with sweeping views of the Hudson River. When she sold it, she made a $6 million profit. But for Meryl, it wasn't about the money. It was simply another step in pruning away excess, shedding weight, choosing simplicity. She also retreats at times to a mid-century modern home in Pasadena, California. A space filled not with paparazzi or red carpets, but with filtered light and silence. Meryl never hoarded her wealth. Instead, she redirected it. She donated her entire $1 million salary from the Iron Lady to the National Women's History Museum. She has funded scholarships for students of English and mathematics in honor of a lost friend. She has championed women screenwriters over 40, an age group Hollywood so often discards. Her fortune, estimated at more than $100 million, das Nackernauers, is not a trophy, it is a bridge. And still, she lives modestly. No diamond-drenched galas, no extravagant parties. Her wardrobe is timeless, her choices deliberate. She invests not in vanity, but in meaning. Physically, she has revealed no severe illnesses, though time has left its inevitable marks. During her Yale years, stress had already ravaged her body with ulcers. Now, at 76, her movements are slower, her steps more measured. She practices meditation, devours books, and tends to her skin with natural simplicity rather than surgery or artifice. She does not chase youth. She honors it quietly. Creatively, she has not retired. Her recent appearance in Only Murders in the Building was a reminder that her flame still burns, that her artistry is still unmatched, but she chooses carefully now, prioritizing stories that matter, voices that deserve to be heard. She mentors. She funds independent cinema. She lifts others the way she once lifted herself from silence. Those close to her say she has prepared her will, ensuring her wealth will nurture both her family and causes she believes in. She is not building a dynasty. She is building a future she may never see, but one she deeply trusts. And yet, in the quiet of that Connecticut home, with curtains drawn and scripts closed, there lingers something tender, something broken. The loss of John Cazale still whispers in her heart. The quiet dissolution of her marriage still echoes. The birthdays missed, the family moments traded for sets and stages, they remain ghosts in the corners of her mind. But she never shows it. Her pain is her own. To the world, she is a goddess, an untouchable legend. But in truth, she is simply a woman who has lived, who has loved, who has lost, and who continues to give, even as time quietly takes. Her legacy is not only in her 21 Oscar nominations or her 3 Golden Statues. It is in the empathy she carried into every role, in the way she taught the world to feel more deeply, to see more clearly. The great gift of human beings, she once said, is that we have the power of empathy. And perhaps that is Meryl Streep's greatest gift to us. She didn't just act, she gave us her soul. Meryl Streep's story is not one of effortless glory. It is one of survival, sacrifice, and unshakable truth. She did not rise like a star shooting across the sky. She burned slowly, deeply, until her light became impossible to ignore. She endured heartbreak that could have broken anyone else. She carried losses she never spoke about. She sacrificed pieces of her soul in service of her craft, leaving echoes of herself in every line, every tear, every trembling glance that the world witnessed on screen. And still, through all of it, she gave us the most human of gifts, empathy. She made us weep in Sophie's Choice, ache in Kramer versus Kramer, tremble in Silkwood, cheer in The Devil Wears Prada, and reflect in The Iron Lady. She reminded us that stories are not just entertainment. They are mirrors, teaching us to feel more deeply, to understand more, to live more honestly. At 76, Meryl Streep does not need the spotlight. She does not need applause. Her legacy lives in the countless young actresses she has inspired to speak truth, in every writer over 40 who dares to believe their voice still matters, in every audience member who saw her and whispered, "I understand. I feel that too." So if you have ever cried watching Sophie's Choice, laughed out loud during Mamma Mia, or sat breathless through her gaze in The Iron Lady, take a moment, leave a comment. Say thank you. Because not everyone can bleed on stage and walk off whole. And even fewer can hurt so deeply and still make us believe they have never broken at all. Meryl Streep is not marble nor myth. She is flesh, blood, and soul, a woman who lived, who loved, who lost, and who gave. And in giving, she became timeless.